Hey guys, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History, and today we are continuing to learn about classical Greece. So we most recently learned about Greece and Persia, and we are just going to go on with Greece. So please make sure you have your notes ready so you can take some notes, and remember you need to complete a daily cover page for this lecture, as well as answering any questions in Edpuzzle. Okay. So, for your Beltwork, what are 3 differences and 3 similarities between Persia and Greece? It's always useful to use these Beltwork questions as a self-assessment. Can you answer the question without looking back at your notes? If yes, then you've learned it, you know it. If no, okay, well, you need to do a little bit more daily review. Maybe annotate your notes, read the textbook. There's a variety of things. Watch crash course videos, work on having more detailed summaries. But it's an indication that you don't know it. And if you want to know it, which you should because you need to know it for class, then you need to review. So today we're learning about classical Greece. Our objective: you will be able to explain how alliances and conflicts influenced the development and decline of ancient Greece. So we are picking up with the height of Athenian power. If you remember, we left off with the end of the Persian War. The Persian army had been pushed out of Greece. The Athens, had rebounded despite being sacked, and they are going to be forming an alliance with other city-states called the Delian League, and they're really going to be in charge of all of that. So let's jump into it. We see that Athens is going to be really dependent on sea trade. They are going to have stratified social classes with lots of wealthy people. They are going to be under a democratic system, and culturally in Athens, women do not have it great. I think I'm going to talk about this more later, so hold that thought. So in Athens, during our classical period, right, we had the archaic period, now we have the classical period, we see that they are going to use a lot of the wealth that they've gathered from the Delian League, from trade, to really subjugate other city-states. And they're going to build up their navy. The port of Athens is going to become the most important port in the entire Mediterranean Sea. So that's saying something. And they are going to use a lot of this wealth to build up the monuments that you can still see today when you go and visit Athens. So let's talk a little bit about philosophy, right? When you think about ancient Greece, a lot of times you think about philosophy. So you have lots of philosophers, right? There's this real emphasis on human reason, on logic, on empiricism. And we see that it really gets us started with Socrates. So Socrates is going to be around from about 470 to 399 BCE. He's going to really question Athenian values. He's going to question tradition, religions, customs, laws. So he shifts the emphasis of philosophy away from the question of science, which is what it was, like where does water come from? How do we balance the 4 humors? Blah, 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 blah. To questions of ethics and human behavior. So a lot of his students are going to come from these very elite, wealthy families. And he didn't really suffer fools lightly. So he would often make enemies by making powerful people feel stupid, because he would reveal their ignorance and pretensions, right? He is poking at the establishment. He is questioning the order that has made Athens wealthy and powerful, and he is training up their sons to question that order as well. So he's seen as a threat. Eventually, he's going to be arrested, tried, and executed. He is going to be blamed for a few of his students who tried to overthrow Athenian democracy. He actually wasn't a fan of democracy, but he's going to be blamed for teaching sophists who were believed to be contradicting traditional religious beliefs and thus undermining morality. And in a trial, juries were made up of hundreds, right? They ultimately find him guilty. It was close, though. And so rather than have his punishment executed upon him, he's going to commit suicide by drinking hemlock. So as a result of that, people are really going to view him more as a martyr and commit themselves to studying even more. All right, one of his students is going to be Plato. So Plato is going to found the Academy. It's this prestigious school of philosophy. And he's really going to ask the question, is utopia possible? Can we form a perfect society? He's really part of this first literate generation in Athens. And the Academy turns into this place where literate and academically minded young men can really pursue higher education. Now, let's be clear. We're talking about citizens, so free men, who are wealthy and probably own property. All right, so this is not a large portion of the population. One of his students is going to be Aristotle. So Aristotle is going to attend the Academy. He is going to actually end up teaching Alexander the Great. And he's going to really develop arguments through the use of logic. So a lot of the philosophical structures that we have in place, like if you take an intro to philosophy class in college, which I hope you do, it's usually a required gen ed, they talk a lot about logic. Like you have to create an argument that like meets these things, otherwise you have like fallacies and all kinds of stuff. So he's going to really teach on everything. Aristotle's going to lecture on politics, philosophy, ethics, logic, poetry, rhetoric, astronomy, physics, zoology, meteorology, psychology. So in doing that, since he's teaching all these different areas, he's really laying the foundations for the sort of modern disciplines of academia that we have today. So during this time as well, we see the height of Greek architecture. So this is going to include our different columns, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. Take AP Art History, learn more about all of these things. We see that they're using this wealth to really build up their city. This is a really fun video. It's certainly not a requirement to watch, but it is super fun. If you haven't never seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, it's excellent. You should. It is not historically accurate. It's a movie about a couple stoners from Southern California in the 80s who end up in a time-traveling phone booth. And they have a history presentation that they have to do. And rather than doing it, they travel through time and just kidnap different historical figures and then bring them back to LA. And shenanigans ensue. So you can find this video along with all of our videos on the YouTube playlist. I encourage you to watch it. This one, I want you to watch. This one is going to be a required viewing. It's from TED Ed. It looks at The Cave, which is a very, very, very famous reference piece of Plato's work. You'll see it referenced in music, in like, if you know the song The Cave by Mumford & Sons, this is the cave they're talking about. You'll see it referenced in poetry, in literature, in politics. So watch this video. It's not very long, but it's going to sort of elucidate his ideas. So you have to watch that video and then come back to answer this question. To what extent do you find Plato's tendency about humans to confuse shadows with reality relevant today? And in society today or in your own life, what sort of things shackle the mind? So you're going to be answering this in Edpuzzle, and it will become very clear to me if you are just BSing it and didn't actually watch the TED Ed video. It's not very long. Pause this one, open up a new tab, watch the TED Ed video, then come back. Okay. Then I want you to be able to discuss the core ideas of Greek philosophy and identify any examples of how those beliefs and values might have influenced Greek culture. Okay, let's talk about inequality in ancient Greece. So sorry about that, hit my laptop. The Greek colonies acted as a population safety valve, right? Greece has a really limited carrying capacity. And so when the populations are getting too high, it's like, all right, off to the colonies. Thank you very much. Some colonists did not go willingly. And in general, when they would get there, like most colonizers, they would reduce the native populations of the new area to be servants, right? So they would oppress the natives to be their slaves or servants. So let's talk about slavery in the classical world. Again, when we talk about slavery in the classical world, do not think like plantation American slavery. Do not think the chattel slavery of the New World. This is a very different kind of slavery we are talking about. So slaves in the classical world are predominantly going to be foreign-born, generally captives from war or battle. Your average family owned a couple slaves. A slave was like a living piece of property, required to do any work, to submit to any sexual acts that the owners wanted, and to receive any punishments. But most are going to be treated like domestic servants. The maid, the cook, the landscaper. And let's be clear, if you were sort of in a lower class working as a domestic servant, you were kind of required to do any work, to submit to sexual acts, to receive punishment. So there isn't a huge amount of distinction other than whether you are free or slave, a legal distinction. So relationships would often develop between slave and owner because of this close contact, right? You would view your slave as a member of the family. They're cooking by your side. They're the ones holding your baby while you're changing the other one, right? So this keeps slaves from being dehumanized, like we're going to see in the Americas, where you have like this plantation owner over here and like way over here, you have the slave, where you can view them as like very separate. Like this is clearly someone who's just sort of drew a bad lot in life and happens to be a slave, but is still fully human. Women did not have it good in ancient Greece. So it really depended on what city-state you were in, your quality of life as a woman. So like in Sparta, women were strong, they were active, they had a really large public presence, they were leaders in their communities, they were outspoken. Athens hated women, so women were highly suppressed, like very tightly controlled. So the belief was that women were naturally promiscuous, obviously, and thus if you just let them wander about, they're just going to have sex with any men they come in contact with and get pregnant, thus introducing other men's children into your household. So as a man, as a father, as a husband, you must tightly control the women of your household. This means that all marriage relationships were highly unequal. Typically, you're having men who are like over 35 marrying teenage girls. If a 35-year-old man or older comes to you and approaches you about any sort of relationship, call the police. That's not okay. We see that women have really no legal rights or protection, right? If something was done against a woman, like if a woman was attacked, if a woman was raped, that would be seen as like, you dishonored her husband. Like, you must pay her husband because of what you did to the woman, right? Like, it's not, the problem isn't that the woman was assaulted. The problem was that the husband has been dishonored. Women's really only job in Athens was to serve the husband with whatever he wanted and produce babies. Female infanticide was very common because sons were so much more highly valued than women. I mean, what are you going to do with a daughter? And in general, we see men and women had a lot of limited contact, right? Men would work outside the home. They would typically eat out all their meals with their male friends. They would sleep in the male quarters of the household. Women stayed in the home. They would cook, they would clean, they would raise the kids, they would supervise the servants. They might go out with for a festival or a ritual, like religious stuff, maybe a funeral, or you might go out and like visit another woman. But you would always be escorted, right? You'd have guards with you to, keep you from jumping the other men. And it would have to be very discreet. One of the other things that you hear a lot about with ancient Greece is homosexuality. And some people have the mistaken belief that because homosexuality was accepted in ancient Greece, that this was a healthy form of the relationship. It wasn't a healthy version of this, right? When we talk about homosexuality in ancient Greece, we're not talking about like two consenting grown men, right, having a relationship with each other. We're typically talking about a grown man and a 12-year-old boy, in which the grown man would be mentoring. That's what they considered, like mentoring the young boy and initiating him into the community. And so, consent really wasn't asked. And this is not something that anyone would say is a good thing. Just like the way, ancient Athenians treated women, not a good thing. All right, let's talk about Athens and Sparta. This is going to be kind of like our focus for the rest of the lecture. So, Athens, democratic, super into philosophy and like art and music and architecture, all about maritime trade. Sparta, oligarchy, right? So they're ruled by a small council. Warriors, right? This emphasis on warriors. Agricultural. Inland. So Athens has grown from a polis to an empire, and this really angers the other city-states, specifically Sparta. So let me give you a little bit more information about Sparta. Sparta is located on the Peloponnese. It's an island. Do I have a map here? All right. So we're going to get to the Peloponnesian War closely, but shortly. But here you go. So this island is called the Peloponnese, right? So here's Sparta. You notice how far inland it is. Here is Athens on the sea, seaport, blah, blah, blah. All right. So that geography is key because it's going to really influence their culture significantly. So as Sparta started to feel population pressure, rather than just like sending people off to the colonies, what they would do would they would just invade their neighbor for agriculture, and they would use the population as slaves. Culturally, Sparta is going to be very, very simple. No decor, everyone's the same. Luxury makes you weak, right? So already we have this contrast to Athens, which is all about like wine and music and luxury, and like we have all of the things we could ever want. Women were free and equal to men, right? Again, if you're Athenian, you're looking at this, you're like, ugh, you let your women walk around? You let your women talk to you? Are you kidding me? Women are encouraged to be strong. They would run the city-state when the men were off at war. It's a military oligarchy. So it means all boys go to military training. You always need to be prepared, constant vigilance. It's an autocratic government that really focuses on having a strong military state. So boys to be taken at age 7, made tough through deprivation. So, it's not like Sparta's perfect here, like child abuse. You would take a 7-year-old boy, so that's a first grader, force him to starve, force him to fight with each other, slaughter animals. And if you cried or you got beat up or you got hurt, well, you're too weak. Severe discipline would also form these young men into warriors, and beatings, right? How do you get stronger so you don't give up in battle when you are attacked? Well, we'll just beat you a bunch and you'll get up. So a Spartan's life is completely devoted to the state, right? If Athens is much more about individualism and pleasure, Sparta, you might hear about a Spartan lifestyle, right, is completely devoted to the state. No luxury. And you don't see significant intellectual or artistic development in Sparta. And in general, Sparta is going to be very kind of cautious and isolationist. So if we're going to compare and contrast Sparta and Athens, right, some of the similarities here are going to be you have these wider assemblies in which free men, citizens, can participate. And governments would include some smaller councils, but in general, you have oligarchy versus democracy. So this is a huge difference. So I'd like you to compare and contrast Athenian and Spartan political life. What was it comprised of? How could people affect political change? So I want you to think about that a little bit. You're going to answer this in one of our Ed puzzle questions. I want you to watch this one too. It's about Sparta, specifically about the process for young men. It's pretty fun. Sparta's fun to learn about. Okay, but let's talk about the Peloponnesian War. So the failure of the city-state and the triumph of the Macedonians. So two main wars in ancient Greece. Persian War, Greek city-states versus Persia. Peloponnesian War, Athens versus Sparta. So Sparta ultimately is going to win in the end. Your entire population has been trained since basically birth to be warriors. Yeah, you're going to win against people who spend time talking about philosophy and drinking wine. It's a protracted conflict between Athens and Sparta and their various allies, right? It's just not these two city-states. It's all the other city-states who have allied with them. It is a result of Athenian imperialism, right? Athens is going around conquering other city-states, being like, you have to listen to me. And because of the massive alliance systems, most of the Greek city-states are actually involved. So what they're fighting over ultimately is control over Greece. Which alliance system is going to have the most control? So you can see the orange territories were allied with Sparta. The green ones were allied with Athens. You can see how many of these are colonies. Sparta is actually going to receive aid from Persia because Persia is still mad at Athens because Athens won in the Persian War. Athens has a superior navy. They are going to completely control the Aegean Sea. They're going to use their navy to protect them from siege and build walls to protect the sea lanes, right? So they can continue to get resources. Pericles, right? Pericles, the leader of Athens, is going to refuse to meet Sparta for battle on land because they would lose. They know they would lose. Sparta has a vastly superior army, but they have no navy. Persia is the ones who eventually give them a navy. And what they're ultimately going to do is destroy the morale and the resources of Athens by attacking all of their allies. So sure, Athens itself might be protected, but they can't protect all of their allies. It's not going to help that during the war, Athens is going to suffer from a devastating plague, and that's going to lead to the navy being defeated, and Athens is going to surrender. So ultimately, the concept of the polis, the city-state, is inherently flawed, right? Because it fosters rivalry, fear, and warfare among neighboring communities, right? Instead of all of these territories banding together and helping each other, they were constantly in competition with each other. This is just like what we saw with Mesopotamia and Babylon and Sargon and Akkad, right? These city-states end up hurting each other more than building a strong community. Enter Alexander the Great. Actually, enter his dad, Philip II. Philip II is going to be from Macedonia, so all right, Macedonia up here in the north. So Macedonia is going to be strong in terms of warriors. It's a very mountainous area. They have a better equipped soldiers with long thrusting spears and less armor than the hoplites of like Athens and Greece. Because it's so mountainous, they use a lot of horses, so they have like mounted cavalry, and so they have this amazing military. Athens and Sparta and everyone else are all super tired from the Peloponnesian War. In comes riding this highly skilled army that can just like stab you through the holes in your armor without getting off their horse. And he has catapults, which allows you to storm a city with walls. So he's going to conquer like all of the Greek city-states, and he is going to start building an empire. But ultimately, his empire is going to be cut short. He is going to be killed. Sorry, my notes closed, so let me just open them really fast. He's going to be killed as a young man, assassinated, in fact. Not quite as young as his son will be when eventually he dies, but cool. But he's going to die having just conquered the Greek mainland. His son, Alexander, a very young man, is going to take charge. He is going to expand the territory that his father had already conquered away from just the Greek mainland to include Persia, North Africa, basically all of the Middle East, and he's even going to reach basically like Afghanistan. So let's look at let's look at a map. All right, so here is the reach of Alexander's empire. We refer to this as the Hellenistic Age. So it's the term that we use to refer to Alexander's rule and that of his generals. So what does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to have to open up my notes. Sorry, guys. It's a term used to refer to this time period because Alexander's not going to live very long. He's going to conquer all these places, and then he's going to die at age 30. But everywhere he goes, he spreads Greek culture. He builds an agora and an acropolis. He spreads Greek philosophy and Greek language. And so it's a Hellenistic age because even though he dies relatively young, his influence is going to remain huge on the territory. I mean, until really we get Islam and the birth of the Umayyad and the Abbasid caliphates, it's really Greek culture that's going to be dominant through here. I mean, Greek culture is going to be hugely influential on the Romans. So you can see we begin with Greece itself, then the Anatolian Peninsula, down into Egypt. They conquer the pharaohs, install their own. Persia, and even to essentially the Hindu Kush, so Afghanistan. After he dies, he hasn't married, he doesn't have any kids, there's no clear inheritor. And since it's such a huge area, and how do you govern such a huge area before you have telephones or telegraph even, right? His generals decide to divide it up. So they are going to have the Seleucid monarchy here. You're going to have the Ptolemaic monarchy here. Greece is continuing to kind of do its own things. There's going to be like independent states and stuff. And then Parthia is going to expand into a lot of these kingdoms as well. Okay, so I want you to compare Cyrus, think about yesterday, Cyrus to Alexander the Great. I do want you to watch this one. It will really help you if you're struggling on like comparing Cyrus and Alexander the Great. This one will really help you. So maybe watch this video first and then answer that question. But it's a great crash course. It will give you an overview of all of these different things. All right, if we're going to generally compare Persia and Greece, some significant people to know for Persia: Cyrus, Darius; for Greece, Homer, Herodotus, Pericles. Persia is going to practice Zoroastrianism. Greek is just very polytheistic. Important cities are going to be Susa and Persepolis for Persia, whereas Athens and Sparta are going to be the ones for Greece. Persia is going to have a monarchy with the use of satraps as governors. So a complex bureaucracy, great infrastructure, very patriarchal. Greece is going to have different governments for different city-states, but if we're thinking Athens and Sparta, democracy, oligarchy. Their soldiers are going to be hoplites. Our social class is really going to be like citizens versus slaves. And again, super patriarchal. So let's do a few practice questions. This one should be pretty easy for you to begin with. Which of the following is not true about our Greek colonies? So you're going to answer this on Edpuzzle. Now, one of the things that the AP is going to ask you to do is to answer a source-based question. This is going to be true in APUSH next year as well. So with a source-based question, you're going to look at a source. Maybe it's a couple quotes like this. Maybe it's a map. Maybe it's a graph. Maybe it's a longer piece of text or a piece of art. And you're going to use your prior knowledge and the information given in the sources to answer the question. So that means it requires complex thought. It's not just going to be recall, right? These questions are really hard. Students typically really struggle with source-based questions because it's not just memorization. It requires higher level thinking. So we're going to practice them. So use these two sources that answer the following question. I'm not going to read through them, but they're two quotes, one from a modern day historian and one from Hippocrates. Again, feel free to pause the video and take as much time as you need. Here is the question. So, the passage by Hippocrates weakens Hooper's claim in the first passage by, so suggesting that medicine was a thriving discipline in ancient Greece, expressing a mistrust of supernatural causes of medical conditions, seeking to understand a disease that does not have an obvious external cause, implying that Greek physicians did not have effective treatments for some diseases. So I'm going to go back to that source. Again, pause it, take your time as you need it. Answer the question. This is just practice. You're not going to be graded on whether or not you get these right. But I want you to try. All right, we have one more. Another quote for one more question. This is a quote from Pericles. It's the funeral oration, so always pay attention to who's speaking, why are they speaking, like what's the source, and when is the source. So, the quote above is intended to convince parents of those who died in the Peloponnesian War that ... So which of these is true? Thinking about the quote, thinking about what you know about the Peloponnesian War, what is the quote's intention? So this is building on some of those AP historical skills of reading sources and being able to pull out the intention. It's not easy to do, but try. All right, finally, for your summary, I'd like you to explain how alliances and conflicts, whether social, economic, cultural conflicts, whatever it might be, influence the development and the decline of ancient Greece. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, please ask. It's really important that you are proactive with asking questions. I'm available during my office hours. I'm available via email, on like Teams chat, whatever. There's a bunch of ways you can reach me. Please ask me. Thanks, guys.